rental housing is the darling in the real estate allocation, there's still enough pent-up capital out there to invest, and that's why I don't think you're seeing land prices collapse. My concern there would be that all of a sudden there's great deals in office buildings at 50 cents on the dollar or retail. That's when you can see all the capital move elsewhere.
Welcome to Multifamily Method, a podcast which explores the state of the multifamily real estate market and some of the backgrounds, methodologies, and words of wisdom from some of today's most successful multifamily real estate entrepreneurs nationwide.
Hello everyone, this is Mike Mosier with Capstone Companies, and today on the Multifamily Method, I'm very excited to have as a host John Burns of John Burns Real Estate Consulting. John has a BA in economics from Stanford University and an MBA from UCLA. Before founding John Burns Real Estate Consulting in 2001, John worked at a national consulting firm for 4 years and for 10 years at KPMG, 2 as a CPA and 8 in the real estate consulting practice. John co-authored Big Shifts Ahead, Demographic Clarity for Businesses, a book written to help make demographic trends easier to understand, quantify, and anticipate. John founded the company to help business executives make informed housing industry investment decisions. I will tell you as well, just in terms of my introduction, I find John fascinating to follow on LinkedIn and social media. He always has a lot of insight into construction and building material costs and trends going on demographically around the country that I think are really of note to any multifamily owner and investor. And that's really the context of our conversation. So welcome, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. We got a lot of research and I post one piece of it every day. So that's what you're seeing.
I love it. Yes, I love it. You got a good, strong team around you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So I know you track not only for rent product like multifamily, which is obviously our focus in manufactured housing, but you also track a lot of for sale home construction. So what do you see as the macro dynamics taking place between the for sale and the for rent side of housing right now in the United States, John?
Well, yeah, to be a housing researcher, you got to understand it all. So, I mean, all this may sound obvious, but I find people kind of don't pull it together sometimes. So, and the Fed is kind of shooting themselves in the foot right now. So what they've done is mortgage rates have trended up. They basically announced, I mean, they haven't come out and said this, but you got in Fed speak, they've announced we're going to force the economy into a recession or we're going to get lucky first. Those are the two things that are going to have to, one of those or both is going to have to happen for inflation to come down. So they're raising rates to force spending down and to force us into recession, which is forcing up mortgage rates and killing the for sale housing market. But at the same time, when you kill the for sale housing market, you tell a whole bunch of renters that want to buy a house that you got to stay renting, and they're growing the demand for rentals. Occupancies are insanely high in almost every product type and in every market, and rents are going through the roof. In fact, I just reviewed 3 publicly traded apartment recalls this morning where all 3 of them had their rents grow 15% in the last year. And you know, so and rent is almost a third of CPI. So what is actually happening is they're causing a big component of inflation to increase right now. And I know there's other things that are wonky, but I think they're making inflation even worse, at least from a housing perspective in a typical renter consumer. It's fascinating. A homeowner hasn't seen any increase in their housing cost really at all, except maybe their property taxes go up. So they're really hitting the renter really hard, which is benefiting like crazy a landlord from the demand side. But if they've got adjustable rate debt or they're a developer who relies on an exit cap rate, that's where the pain comes in our business. So that's my best answer to pull it all together on the whole housing composite right now.
That's a great answer. And I think it's clear with the Fed, we have a divergence of intent and impact, right? The intent is to cure the inflationary issues, which I believe are mostly supply chain related. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the impact of raising rates is you're kind of putting the whole thing to sleep just to solve this one problem with the supply chain. So it's a very draconian approach, right?
Well, we have some supply chain experts, and so supply chain is completely part of it. I think there's more than that, though. I mean, this work from home ability for people has allowed a huge decoupling of roommates. In fact, this is maybe from 6 months ago, but Avalon Bay disclosed, one of the largest apartment companies in the country, that the number of residents per apartment fell from 1.8 to 1.6 in a 1 year period. I mean, that is a huge shift that created a ton of household formations. If you look at RealPage and their apartment data, and it's just institutional quality apartments, we had maybe 6 or 7 years in a row where there was about an increase of 300,000 leased apartments in the country. It was more than 600,000 last year. So that had nothing to do with the supply chain. That had to do with COVID and the ability to work from home. And I can relocate somewhere else and maybe live by myself or with one roommate instead of two. I don't think this goes on forever. But I think and I don't think the Fed can do anything about that. That's just the new reality. I mean, the only thing the Fed can do is create a recession where people have to go back and take on more roommates again. And that's, both Jay Powell and Janet Yellen, the former Fed chair, said this is going to involve a lot of pain. And I think that's what they meant when they said that. Yeah.
Would you see the rising rents ultimately forcing that number back up towards 1.8 because of affordability?
Well, you would think so. But what is happening as part of this, though, is people are relocating. So if I'm in an area where everybody makes $100,000 and I'm paying $2,000 in rent, and I move to an area where everybody makes $80,000 and I pay $2,000 in rent, I'm getting a nicer apartment and I'm paying the same rent and I'm qualifying easily. But that area, the rents are going up. And that's exactly what we saw too. Say, I'm quoting the RealPage data again here, but from maybe 4 months ago, rent growth was up 13% year over year, but the incomes of people applying for apartments is up 13% too. And it's not, I don't think everybody was getting a 13% raise. It was a combination of good raises and some relocation that I just told you about.
That's a great point. Actually, last podcast I did was with Jay Parsons from RealPage, and he touched on this same phenomenon. Yeah. We actually touched on this topic, John, and he was he had a lot of insight into that topic without a doubt. And I'm hearing the same thing from you, that you're seeing the exact same trends there.
No, and our apartment, we do maybe 800-900 feasibility studies a year for development, and maybe 250 of them are rental, the rest are for sale. And my staff is seeing it all over the country. In markets where we usually don't do a lot of work, people move into Huntsville and people move into Memphis and bring in their higher incomes with them, and not to buy a house, but to rent, or maybe to rent for a year or two until we settle down.
I saw a very interesting stat you posted on LinkedIn recently, and I believe the number was the spread between home ownership and renting in a lot of markets is about $840. Is that correct? Can you give us a little bit more insight into that stat and what that means?
Well, that was a national average. So it varies a lot by market, but usually it's a little more expensive to be a homeowner from a monthly payment standpoint than to be a renter. Well, when you have 40% home price appreciation and then the mortgage rate goes from 3 to 5.5, that gap gets a hell of a lot wider. Even though rents are growing, mortgage payments grew a hell of a lot faster. And so that's what you're alluding to. And that's why the rental demand is increased so much. And that's why rents are going up so much. The other thing that can help all that is a ton of supply hitting the market. And we have like a 40-year high supply of apartments under construction right now. So I do think that supply is going to show up probably sometime next year. It's taken forever to get those buildings finished. And if it shows up during the middle of a recession, that could be pretty tough. If it shows up when the economy is still doing okay, rent growth normalizes.
Okay. Yeah. Never having researched that topic, the spread of $840 was very striking to me. I would have not have thought that high, and it really spoke to the inflation and interest rate movement that you described. Really was an eye opener for me.
Well, the mortgage payment just went from $2,000 to $2,800 on a typical house overnight. That's basically what happened.
So you talked about land price appreciation slowing down. We do have a significant land sales platform here at Capstone to developers. And I'm curious what you see as the components making up the slowdown in land appreciation, because for a long time it was on a tear.
Yeah, and not tearing as much as you would usually think, because land prices are a function of, what you can sell the house for, the apartment for, minus how much it costs to build it. And the costs have been going up dramatically, minus the profit margin. So we do a quarterly land banking or land broker survey. We do a lot of work for land bankers too. And I think we had about 80 brokers respond last quarter. And about a quarter of the deals are getting retraded. About a quarter are dropping. For the most part, we're still, we're sitting here in August. We're still in that, well, can you give me an extension phase? So it's a little bit of wait and see. But I can tell you, home prices are coming down dramatically. I'm hearing from my apartment developer clients that pretty much everything I bought, and apartment owner clients, pretty much everything I bought in the last year is probably underwater at this point, or I intended to do it because my exit strategy, my exit cap rate is going up, or my borrowing costs are going up. So that tells you how people are looking at land. Conversely, there's still a ton of money looking for yield. And so all the real estate capital that comes out of the pension funds and the sovereign wealth funds isn't finding great deals in office, isn't finding great deals in retail. Actually, looks like industrial, which was the darling, has slowed down a bit too. So rental housing is the darling in the real estate allocation, which they all have huge real estate allocations. So there's still enough pent up capital out there to invest. And that's why I don't think you're seeing land prices collapse or really start to trend down very much. My concern there would be that all of a sudden there's great deals in office buildings at 50 cents on the dollar or retail. That's when you can see all the capital move elsewhere. Much to my amazement, that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I keep hearing about that's outside the space in which we operate. So I'm just adjacent to that conversation. And I don't know if it has to do with the length of the leases or any other factor, but it does feel inevitable, John, that there's a reckoning in those other asset classes coming, right?
Yeah. And I've been doing this for 30 years, and I went back and did some history on this. And it's really surprising when the market turns how long it takes for good opportunities to play out. I mean, there's probably a good 2 to 3 year renegotiation with the lenders and extend and pretend. And there's a lot of reasons that things just, the opportunities don't present themselves overnight.
So that's interesting. So in your research over the last 3 decades, you think there's we'll call it 24 to 36 month lag in terms of when these things really start to come up?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the last time, Lehman Brothers blew up at the end of 2008. It wasn't 2011 or 2012 really until the money found it was the right time to invest. I'm old enough. I remember the S&L crisis. Same story then. In California where I was at the time, that hit in 89, maybe 1990. Best time to get in was probably 94, 95. And that's when all of the private equity guys, Starwood and Morgan Stanley and others, really just killed it. But it was in 91 or 92. That would have been too early.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that kind of begs that question. So you recently posted something about supply chain bottlenecks decreasing and building material costs, some of them going down. I think you do an excellent job tracking this. And I'm curious, is lumber the bellwether, the sign of things to come? What are you seeing in terms of supply and pricing?
Yeah, so we've got about 8 people in our building products practice. And, I only know what they teach me. So this is not really my area of expertise. Every product has its own issues. So lumber's got a lot of issues that are just very different. Fires and, the trucker shortage. If there's a trucker shortage and you're a trucker, the last trucking job you're going to take is to go off-road and pick up logs. I mean, you're going to take the easy jobs to go.
I never thought about that, but that's true, right?
I hadn't either until the CEO of Weyerhaeuser.
It doesn't sound good to me right now.
The CEO of Weyerhaeuser he does 11,000 trucks a day that they oversee, and he has to find those truckers. It's really hard. And that issue is not the same in appliances and other things. So I'm going to give a kind of a cop-out answer here. It depends a lot on the material and the commodity that goes into maybe making that material.
What do you anticipate the future being? We have a lot of developers who we do business with that listen to this podcast. Do you see these costs waning or abating at any point? Because they've just seen massive increases for quite a long period of time now.
Lumber's come down dramatically, then it's back up again. I mean, it could be beetles in Canada. I mean, there's a million things that happen there. Forest Economic Advisors. I would follow Stinson Dean on Twitter. He'll tell you what's going on with that material. Everything else is pretty product specific.
That's helpful. Thank you. So we've gone from the dirt to the building materials. We're just walking through the process, right? And what about labor supplies? What are you seeing in terms of labor? And obviously that was a huge pinch point on a lot of deals over the last few years. You hear many tales of subs walking off job sites to make a quarter more an hour slinging drywall around the corner every day. And I'm not hearing that as much now. So what are you seeing on the labor side?
A permanent labor shortage, which we predicted in our book in 2016. And it wasn't anything more forecasting than just forecasting when people hit their 60s, they retire. And when people who are 15 become 21, they enter the workforce, or 18 or whatever. You run the math on American demographics, and the surge in retirement basically was almost assuredly going to keep labor short. And if you remember, we were having these labor discussions in 2015, 2016, 2017. It was, and the construction industry in particular is full of baby boomers, so it was probably more skewed to people that were retiring. And I talk to my builder clients all the time, and their contractors, and all their contractors have been teaching their kids, don't do what I do for a living, go to college. So there's been an anti-construction worker bias that I believe is very much partially because construction wages have not kept up with inflation over the last 40 years. And so you used to be you could be a carpenter and buy a house and support your family and the whole thing. That's not as easy anymore. I think because of what I just told you, wages on construction are going to continue to go up and up and up. The economy will impact things, but we're going to have to pay people less. And my developer clients, it's funny how many of them agree with everything I just said, but just don't want to do it. Like, well, that'll solve the problem. And you mentioned people getting raises. That's how you solve the problem. And ideally, you lean hard into making them more efficient on the flip side. And so that's how you keep costs down. And there's a lot going on in improving efficiency, but that's a whole nother topic.
I believe that's an entirely different podcast, and technological advancements there as well as a whole nother discussion. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you. And then development pipeline. So construction costs are up somewhere in the realm of 20-21%. Year-to-date rents are up, I'm hearing 10 to 15%. The data you just shared from a large apartment owners, 15% over last year. So how do you see this impacting? And we've had a glut of supply, as you said, a 40-year high of apartments being delivered in the next 12 to 24 months. So what do you see as the future of supply being delivered based on all these factors?
I mean, I honestly find, and I've said this many times before, multifamily supply is the hardest thing to forecast. And I think it tends to be driven more by capital than anything else, and how much capital is out there that wants to do it. And capital will look at the demographics and interest rates and make their forecast. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of capital out there that is real estate oriented, and this is the prettiest girl at the dance, if you will. And so we're forecasting pretty strong construction over the next year or two, although not as strong as today. We think it's going to taper off. because of the exit cap rate issue that I told you. The people that are underwriting it prudently, basically with their own money, are putting their foot on the brake a little bit. But most of the industry seems to be underwriting things with other people's money, and I'll do that deal and I'll take that risk with your money. So that's what's moving forward.
Yeah, it's a lot more risk averse when it's your own pennies. I understand that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about build for rent. I know you tracked that closely and shared some recent stats that 11% of recently delivered lots were targeted for build for rent. So talk us through that trend, because we've just seen it absolutely spike on our side. Came out of nowhere in the last couple of years, and it's on fire.
Yeah. So I'll start with, we just decided internally yesterday that we're going to start calling it build to rent, because everyone's calling it something else.
Right.
We did some checking, and we're now seeing some people's titles that say build to rent. The number of people following build to rent is way more than build for rent. So I've been saying build for rent forever, but now I'm going to say build to rent.
I stand corrected, John.
No, you're not corrected. The world has voted, and we're going to go with build to rent. So I am a huge believer in build to rent. And coming out of that book we talked about, I mean, there are 12 million households in detached homes that rent a detached home. I mean, think about that. And another 3 million attached who live in fear that their landlord is going to decide to sell the house next year and they'll have to move, or have their homeowner neighbors looking at them as the deadbeat transient person in the neighborhood. They don't feel very welcome. I mean, we do a lot of consumer research, so I want to. Everybody seems to be financially oriented, and if something breaks, there's nobody to call. So I think there's a huge demand for professionally managed rental homes. Now, that comes with the downside. Those companies are more likely to jack your rents. So maybe you don't like that. But that's the need that is being served. And if Invitation Homes, American Homes for Rent, Progress Residential, Tricon, Amherst, all these guys can figure out to do it with the homes scattered all over the metro area. What if you put 100 homes right next to each other? They were all brand new, all had the same appliances. You could devote one person to be on site every day, so there is good maintenance. That is exactly what is going on. And I think there's a ton of demand for it. Unfortunately, in the areas where most of those 12 million homes are, there's not a lot of land. So the land tends to be on the outlying areas. So I wouldn't say we're generally overbuilding in the outlying areas, but I would say we're generally very undersupplied in good, mature areas with good school districts. And anybody who can get a deal done there should do really well.
I really think that's a density issue, right? It just requires a lot bigger footprint to do versus traditional multifamily vertical construction. So you need a lot more dirt to get the project completed.
Well, a lot of the build to rent is very dense. I mean, these are 900 square foot courtyard homes with a little tiny backyard. A lot of them don't even have attached garages. Design your designated carport, but you know what? There's nobody on either wall. There's nobody walking above you. You have a little yard for the dog. That's what people want. That's what a segment of apartment renters, frankly, have been wanting for a very long time. That dense product pulls out of apartments. There is the less dense product that you were talking about that is more of a suburban area. But even then, small lot with a garage is exactly what they want.
Yep. Yeah, we do see a lot of that, at least in the Carolinas, more of that suburban, either garage on the front side or back end entrance, either way. So talk a little bit more. You talked about consumer sentiment and how you look at things, the motivation of people beyond just the financial motivation. That really leads to my next question, John, what does the build to rent trend mean for future neighborhoods and submarkets? Because I feel like they may take on a different vibe than traditional ownership neighborhoods, right?
Well, I would think of them like apartment communities. So the turnover will be more than a homeowner neighborhood. but far less than an apartment. I think Invitation Homes had 23% turnover this year, which is a typical apartment is more like 70, right? But a typical homeowner neighborhood does not have 23% turnover every year. So yeah, to be a little more transient. I think that what is very, very misunderstood by the press and some of the politicians is that this caters to a more affluent person. This is brand new product. This is a less dense product. If you look at all the big companies, the average rent is $2,000 and the average income is $130,000. This is not preying on people that are paying $900 a month or living paycheck to paycheck. It's a different consumer.
Mm-hmm. It's renters by choice, certainly. Yeah, I do think sometimes the stigma of rentals, they tend to think of this rough crowd in their backyard, and that's absolutely not true with these communities at all.
Well, and think about this too. So, the big apartment companies, do they not take care of their apartments? They totally take care of their apartments.
And they do a great job.
That's exactly. And then the renters by choice, there's a bunch of policy folks that think that's just horrible. Everybody needs to be a homeowner. We've surveyed these folks. More than 70% of them do want to be a homeowner, but the timing's not just right. I just moved to Charlotte. I want to see if I like my job and be here for a year or two before I pick the neighborhood and get a 30-year mortgage. Or we just got divorced and we're splitting custody with the kids and I need a house with a yard and stuff. That's the renter by choice. It's not a renter by choice forever. It's a renter by choice this year. And that's what I wish some of the politicians and reporters would understand. In fact, one thing I've been doing, which is a lot of fun, is in conferences, I've been asking people, raise your hand if you've rented a house or a townhome before in your life. And more than half the people raised their hand. And people are like, oh my God, like all of us have rented once before. that we were all a renter by choice at some point in our lives.
Multifamily Method is powered by Capstone Companies, the largest privately owned multifamily investment sales brokerage nationwide. Capstone Companies provides dedicated coverage to both primary and secondary markets throughout the Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, and Midwest regions of the United States. Whether buying, selling, or refinancing, Capstone Companies is here to help. Simply put, Capstone is expertise, experience, extra mile. If you're interested in having Capstone provide a complimentary opinion of value on your multifamily asset, please visit us at capstone-companies.com.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into, I want to talk a little bit about municipalities and how they review and handle this. So traditionally, vertical, whether it's garden style or wrap or high rise, a lot of pushback from municipalities on multifamily development in many markets in the country, not all, John. I'm curious, it almost feels to me like build to rent so far is kind of just snuck under the radar because it looks and feels like another neighborhood. But how do you think the municipalities respond to this in the future?
I can tell you my single family rental clients and built to rent clients don't feel like it's snuck under the radar.
They don't. They feel like they're getting the pushback. Okay.
Yeah. The most powerful lobby in the country is the real estate agency lobby at the local level and at the national level. So there's no commission associated with anything rental. So they hate it. There's a NIMBY movement that's for sale or for rent that really at its heart has to do with don't create traffic in my neighborhood.
Right.
They hate it. So when you throw in rental, well, that probably means a more transient person. Okay, true. Not as transient as apartment. But something brand new is a higher income person. And guess what? The landlords do background checks and vet these people before they rent to them, and home sellers don't. So it's not like you're going to be creating areas for criminals, and that's kind of what they're saying. And what I'm trying to get my clients who are going through entitlement issues to change the conversation is, well, and you can get this data, how many people are renting a home in this city today? And you can say, well, council person, there's 5,000 households renting an old home in the city. And if we build 100 new homes, 100 of them, probably 80 of those 100 are going to come from those 5,000 people who are willing to pay more for something nice and new. So you're basically not allowing your 5,000 tenants, your households, to have a better experience. And housing supply in general keeps rents down too. So if your goal is affordability, if they move, the 800 or the 80 units or whatever they just vacated will become available and to somebody with lower income, and that'll dampen the rents. But it's too much of a second level thinking for newspaper articles and conversation. Right. So I'm working on that with some of our clients to help them with the communication.
I think that's the perfect argument. And you really, when you hear it laid out like that, it's just inherently true, right? It's in the best interest to do so.
Well, and then you go to some of these neighborhoods, they haven't seen it before, so there's a lot of uncertainty. But you can go to some of these communities around the country, and they're nice. I mean, you drive through them and you go, wow, I had no idea. In fact, I'll share a quote from one of my home builder clients who has been selling about 10% of their homes to rental landlords. And these are in for sale communities. This is LGI Homes out of Houston, but they're national. And Eric Leeper, the CEO, said, I go back to these communities and the rental homes are maintained nicer than the owned homes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because the landlord's in charge, and
there's a management team there. They're not going to let stuff have deferred maintenance. They're going to take care of it.
Yeah, now he's not selling the homes to slumlords with no money, and it's not in a rent control area and those sorts of things. He's selling them to big companies who care about their brand and are taking care of the house.
That's interesting. That's great feedback, and probably good for the future in terms of working with the local municipalities as they begin to understand this asset type, that, hey, this is a good thing for us.
Yeah, and the owners of these houses have money. I mean, that's why I think the homes look nicer, is because the other people stretch to get into their house and don't have the money to landscape their front yard.
House poor. Yeah, I understand for sure. Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked a little bit about demographics and home hybrid work model driving different outcomes. You specifically spoke about the average amount of people living per apartment dropping from 1.8 to 1.6. Do you see any other trends in housing being driven by the Zoom phenomenon, the work from home phenomenon?
Well, it's a massive location shift, massive. I don't mean to say this is going to kill the cities, because New York is on fire again. But even if you're in a hybrid situation where you're being given the opportunity to work from home 2 days a week, that's your permission slip to go 5 miles further from work, because you only have to make that nasty commute a couple days a week and buy a house or get more from your money as a rental. And that's been a big shift. And this labor shortage, which is permanent, and if we have a recession, maybe it won't. Maybe it'll shift a little bit, but just temporarily. That's the big location shift. And for me, we allow our employees to move wherever the hell they want, as long as they continue to do a really great job. And that's allowed a lot of my employees to move to much. I mean, I'm in California, where it's really expensive. Now I've got people that are living in Florida and upstate New York and all sorts of places where it's far more affordable, and it's perfect for them.
And I think there's a lot of power has gone to the employee, and as long as you can measure outcomes and get good results, so be it. Yeah.
Well, that's what the CEOs and the executives who tend to be my age, I was born in the 1960s, don't understand. Is you can put the systems and processes in place to make this work. We've been doing this for quite a while, because I don't believe that the best people that for me to employ all live within a commuting distance of my offices. So we've leaned hard into making this work, and it is working fantastically. And nobody believes me until they've been at this company, but I have had more new employees say, I feel more connected to my employees here, even though I work remote, than I did at my prior company when I went into the office every day.
Yeah, that's interesting. At Capstone, since COVID, we've hired several folks that work remote, and we've adopted a hybrid schedule for local teams on the ground in the support role. I'll say for our brokers, they always just continue to go in the office when they're not in the field with clients anyway. Their lives didn't change that much, but from a fulfillment staff perspective, we adopted a lot more flexibility in how we approach our people. And it's a good way to keep talent, quite frankly, is my perspective on it.
Yeah, but you need to build some processes. We have a really efficient Monday morning call. We do a lot of, we created a lot of internal groups where people are spending time on Zoom with each other. We taught them how to treat Zoom like an in-person meeting rather than a conference call. It's simple stuff like that really, really, really works. And have a great icebreaker every time you do a meeting, talk for 2 or 3 minutes. You weren't doing that in the office, and people have really gotten to know each other better.
No, those are all good points. We follow a system called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, and we have meeting rhythms, and there's a segue where you kind of warm up, talk about the weekend, and it has been nice. I've actually gotten to know several people that I don't see more than once or twice a year historically. I've gotten to know all sorts of things about what their interests are and what they do in the weekend, and just really get to know them better.
Yeah, everybody knows each other's pets now.
Yes. And weekend activities. There's a lot of golf at Capstone. I'm just going to let you know.
Okay, good. So how'd you play this weekend, right?
For me, the answer is always bad, John. I got my money's worth. So on the demographic shift, are you seeing any specific trends by generation? So you mentioned specifically the boomers being heavy in the construction industry, and that being one of the pain points on labor constraints in that industry. Do you see any other trends with millennials, Gen Z, Gen X?
They will work in construction if you pay them well. So there's plenty of surveys around that, and it's starting to work. You're just going to have to pay up. The other thing is they're very, very comfortable with technology and Zoom, and they really, really value flexibility. A minority of them will try to take advantage of you, so you have to put measures in place for that. But I've learned that if you tell somebody, like, I'm going to let you have flexibility, but you've got to show me every day and every week that you're earning your keep. The A players look you in the eye and say, awesome. The B and C players say, well, what does that mean? I have to show you. So you don't hire the B's and C's. You hire the one that says, well, that's easy, I'll get it done. And that's been a real hiring trick for us. But the message really is they're very, very comfortable hanging out with their friends like you and I are hanging out right now.
That's wonderful. That's great. So give us some updates on what you've been working on. We've talked about a lot of your research, but any particular passion projects you have going on at your company or notable news you want to share with the investor community?
Well, Build to Rent continues to thrive. Continues to thrive. And we used to be very much a for sale shop. So our business, fortunately, is doing okay because the for sale business has slowed. Understanding building products and building materials, which you led to this, has been a huge passion project of mine. And it's a really misunderstood industry. I mean, the building products companies don't talk to each other. They're very insular. And they don't talk to their clients, and they've got distributors and everything between them and the ultimate users of their product. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to help that industry get better.
That's wonderful. Well, the research you put out, I highly recommend to everyone listening to the podcast to check John and his team out. I do via LinkedIn, but you could do via other platforms as well. And I'm very grateful for your time today, John. I learned a lot and really appreciated the discussion we had.
You bet. I will end with one ad. We do have a great research product for people that want to monitor all this stuff. And then we do have an awesome consulting team for development deals.
Sounds great. Thank you, John. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Multifamily Method. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps our podcast get discovered by other savvy investors like yourself. Subscribe to Multifamily Method for free on your podcast platform of choice. Find out more about Capstone Companies at capstone-companies.com. Multifamily Method is executive produced by Capstone Companies. Audio production for the podcast provided by Andy Go of Gojo Studios, and video production by Yash Mystery of Mystery Projects.